Crown Ground here in Accrington, home of one of the most famous names in soccer, Accrington Stanley. And as you join us on this glorious Saturday afternoon, it's Stanley now taking over that chance to take the goal away to our left. And as the ball goes out for a goal kick, it gives me a chance to go through some of this Stanley team. And what a team it is, including such famous names as Duncan McFadden, Simon Westwell, David McDowell, and that infamous centre forward, Jock Wiley.
Stanley's a team that we all talk about. Their name and fame are spreading far and wide. They're on the map.
Accrington Stanley may be the most well-known of the ex-Football League clubs, but there was no romance when they resigned from the Football League in February 1962. Within a few years, their old ground was derelict and vandalised. The most recent stand, which became one of the prime causes of Stanley's financial collapse, had gone. In 1972, the old stand was burnt out. The camera shows the ruin the next day, but by this time the football ground at Ewood Park was no more. Little remains of the old stadium today. The dawn of a new club rose in 1968, and the first faltering steps were made to ensure the rebirth of Stanley. On Whalley Road, behind the Crown Inn, a new ground began to take shape. But this was no modern stadium, and during the first few years it was little more than a basically enclosed pitch with few facilities for the normal handful of spectators that attended the matches at the Crown Ground. Those first years saw a gradual development of the ground in order to fulfil the club's ambitions, but with little finance available, it was a slow process, although one big improvement was the new dressing rooms off one corner of the pitch. As long as voluntary help was willing, as shown here by former director Dave Stanley, progress continued, and by the late 1970s improvements had been made to the perimeter walling. Perhaps most significant was the erection of floodlights, which was undertaken on a Sunday during 1986. A club had arrived. The town had a worthy team, and over the years a slowly developing ground with good facilities. But earlier, in 1981, one of the most necessary and also most expensive items was the pitch itself. The poor surface was at times bereft of grass and consisted of little more than mud. Obviously something had to be done, and once again the supporters rallied around.
The ground really was just a a swamp. We used to, any heavy weather at all, heavy rain at all, and we tried to roll that ground. It was like a deluge, a flood water falling behind you, and we couldn't put a machine on it. We used to drag it by a big roller, 2 or 3 of us pulling a roller, and a tidal wave followed us. And after we looked back, all you saw was black. You saw no grass whatsoever. You know, it was just one mud bank. You know, and we used to play up to the ankles in mud some of the games. It was terrible. So, but it certainly has come on leaps and bounds now as the pitch. You know, it's because you can see now it's playable all the year round, and I think we've done a good job to it.
By the 1990s, money, plus the sweat and tears of voluntary workers over the previous 2 decades, had ensured a ground to be proud of and eminently suitable for Northern Premier League football. Accrington Stanley was once again on the football map. One of the reasons for the original club's demise was poor support, although that little support had come, at least in spirit, from far and wide, and one keen fan even moved to Accrington just to watch, amongst others, the old Stanley.
I listen to football all the time, both English and Scottish football, on my radio, and it says, round about Accrington, it says, you've got Burnley, your Rovers in First Division, you see, you've got near Manchester teams and not far from Liverpool. And really that's why I came to Accrington. Football brought me to Accrington.
There was sufficient interest in the town to resurrect the club after Councillor William Parkinson called a public meeting in 1968. And 2 years later, the new Accrington Stanley played their first match, the start of what was to become a highly successful period in the Lancashire combination. Supporter Terry Slinger was astute enough to capture some of the new club's highlights on film, starting with this match, one of the first games ever played by the new club in the 1970-71 season.
On Stanley, on lads, on Stanley, on. We'll cheer our heads on when you get that ball into the net, so it's on.
Things started buzzing at the Crown Ground, and once again the Old Reds, as their forerunners were known, were back in business. The team soon made an impact in the Lancashire combination, finishing as runners-up in the 1971-72 season, as well as winning the League Cup. Initially, support only hovered around the 200 mark, but for big matches, much larger crowds were present at the Crown Ground. An example was this 1972 FA Cup match, when Runcorn were held to a 1-1 draw. 1973-74 season finished in exciting fashion. If the Reds had scored from the spot during this home match, then they would have claimed the title in front of their own fans. But the celebrations had to wait until the next Saturday at Darwin. Dave Barham was a proud man as he lined up with his team. So were the fans who had endured Spartan facilities at the Crown Ground. The 1971 vintage stand was not replaced until the mid-1980s. This season was the most successful in the club's short history, for they won the treble, the Championship, the Combination Cup, and also the George Watson Trophy. In the first leg of the Combination Cup final, Stanley were held to a 2-2 draw at home to St Helens. In the return leg at Houghton Road, John Nuttall was the hero when he scored for Stanley the only goal on the night. Dave Parr jostles with an opponent during this game in the late 1970s, and later in the match David Hargreaves scored one of the 330 goals in his football career. Other shots were not far off target. Home matches at the end of the 1980-81 season were played at the adjacent old Accringtonians ground, once the training ground for Blackburn Rovers. This was necessary for the much needed work had started on the pitch at the Crown Ground. The 3-0 victory over Maghull clinched the Cheshire League Division 2 Championship for the Reds. They completed the double that season when they won the Divisional Challenge Shield. Therefore, due to the team's successes, the annual Champions vs Cup winners match could not be played as such. In the event, Stanley took the field against the divisional runners-up Glossop, with this match being played at Rossendale United's ground. Lifetime Stanley supporter Doris Moore was on hand as usual to give encouragement.
Come on, Reds! We want two!
Yet another goal from David Hargreaves ensured a 1-0 victory to Accrington. A visit was made to Springfield Park, the home of Wigan Athletic, on the 16th of April 1984 for the final of the Lancashire Junior Cup. David Hargreaves opened the scoring for Stanley in the first half, but South Liverpool fought back and won the game with the last-minute goal. Continued success would eventually ensure a gradual increase in the crowds, and there was invariably plenty of action. In this charity match against neighbours Burnley, 2 penalty kicks were awarded, with each side scoring from the spot. Although attendances still rarely exceeded 300, a big match always ensured a large number. Hard-working club officials are always on hand, with one of the club's founder members, Tom McComb, taking the money at the gate. The fans pack the terraces, and new manager Franco Kane, third from the left, awaits the kick-off for his first game at the helm. At Sutton Town, Stanley, in unfamiliar black and white stripes, took the lead through John Robinson during this league match in April 1988, and Stanley went on to win the game 2-1.
All the way, Chris! All the way! Should have gone up.
The following week, only a draw was needed at Eastwood Handley to ensure promotion to the Northern Premier League Division 1, but despite having 70% of the play, the Reds crashed out by 4-0 and finished only 4th place in the table.
Come on! Up away!
After 20 years of progress, which has taken the club through the Lancashire Combination, the Cheshire League, the North West Counties League, and finally to the First Division of the Northern Premier League, Stanley reached their peak during the 1992-93 season. They not only rode high in the league, but also fought their way through to the second round of the FA Cup. For a few days, the fans were able to savour the atmosphere of a big match occasion when they were drawn at home in the first round proper.
Stanley fancy! Get back on your seat. They got a programme. Stanley fancy, 50p! Any fancies? We've got a fancy. Anyone? 50p! Get your fancies, 50 bits, go on!
I think the boys are going to do well. I think if the boys get out there and give the best, they can't do any better.
The name of Accrington Stanley once again came to the fore in the Premier Cup competition, and against the odds they overcame GM Vauxhall Conference side Gateshead to send a crowd of over 1,000 wild. This victory captured the imagination of the football world, and preparations were made for the biggest event in the club's 25-year history. As part of these preparations, they were afforded the luxury of a one-night stay in a hotel before setting off for their home match with 3rd Division Crewe Alexandra. By coincidence, the last team that the old Accrington had played back in 1962.
All I want you to do is just have a look and get into your minds one thing only when you watch this. Man for man, they are only as good as you, and you are only as good as them.
I think it'll be a very close game in the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then we'll probably go 1-up. We'll hang out till half time, and then in the second half they'll be throwing everybody forward, and we'll catch them on the break, go 2-up. And they might just score, they might just sneak one in the last 5 minutes to just make it a bit tense in the end, but I think we'll win 2-1.
Do you think we'll score?
I'll be very surprised if I don't.
Although a home game, the venue was switched to the nearby Premier League ground of Blackburn Rovers.
It's going to be very nerve-wracking. You feel that. Feel the nerves tingling already. Should be a great day, really.
An enormous crowd of 10,081 turned up at Ewood Park, with most of them hoping for a major shock. But there was to be no fairy tale ending as the team lost to their big brothers. After just over 20 years, the club are now just 2 steps from the Football League itself. But would they ever be able to successfully compete at this level?
Well, we'd like to go into the Vauxhall Conference, certainly. But our ground is not up to the standard yet. We're talking about a lot of money, and we just can't. We don't have the money in the club at the present moment. Maybe if we get a couple of good seasons, or where we're up there near the top, and we get the crowd, larger crowd, up to 1,000 maybe. At the present moment we've got 6,700 coming on here. I mean, and HFS Loons were one of the best supported clubs around, both home and away.